looking at billions of years. So we're here at point number 3, evolutionary dating methods give widely different results. This is pretty crazy when we start looking at it. This is known as the anomaly factor. Scientists have tried to eliminate it, but they have been unsuccessful. So, we say thousands, not billions. This one's pretty good. Rock paintings in the South African bush in 1991 were dated by Oxford University's radiocarbon accelerator at 1,200 years old, but they had actually been painted by an art class only a few years earlier. That is trustworthy science right there, isn't it? I mean, that's just good that you can trust science like that, right? Volcanic rocks in Hawaii were dated at 160 million to 3 billion years old. That's interesting. When they were actually formed from an eruption in 1801. Trust the science, people. Trust the science. Rocks at the Mount Ngauruhoe volcano in New Zealand were dated at 270 to 3.5 million years, but they were actually formed between 1949 and 1976. Look at that. That's a $3 million year difference. Okay. So that's radiometric dating differed by 3 million years. That's quite a difference there. All right. Louis Leakey's Zinjanthropus skull was dated at 1.75 million years by the potassium-argon method and at 10,000 years by the carbon-14 method. So which one do you trust? Which one's the accurate one? Which one's the right one, or are they both wrong? A layer of volcanic ash at Lake Turkana, Kenya, was dated by 3 different teams with results varying from 500,000 to 17.5 million years. That's pretty big right there. Dr. Steve Austin, a member of the RATE project, had samples tested from the alleged oldest and youngest strata of the Grand Canyon. He used the isochron dating method, which is supposed to be infallible. The oldest rocks were dated at 1.07 billion years, while the youngest were dated at 1.34 billion. Thus, the infallible isochron dating method says that the youngest strata is 270 million years older than the oldest strata. So how do they even come up with these numbers? They just decide themselves, and they're like, well, it's in this layer, so we're going to say it's that old. That's essentially what's happening. We're just going to decide it's that old. And so this one's the youngest, this one's the oldest, and here's their dating methods. Are messing with their science. In another rate study, rocks from the Beartooth Mountains in Wyoming range from 1.5 to 2.6 billion years. That is a difference of more than 1 billion years. So how old's the Earth? I mean, we're going to get into more stuff. I think it's in the next study that throws out some questions to be pondered. Dating methods that are this widely variable and contradictory surely lack real scientific authority. Number 4, evolutionists are highly selective in choosing dates. I think we've already seen that, but we'll point it out. Typically, they select dates they prefer while ignoring those they find unacceptable. Dating methods for a young Earth are ignored. Science has proposed many methods of geochronometry, but of these, only one, that of the radioactive decay of uranium and similar elements, yields an age for the Earth of billions of years. This is the one method that has been enthusiastically promoted, while all other methods have been neglected. So the one gives them the answer they're looking for, so that's the one we're going to go with. We're going to reject the others. There are powerful professional pressures on scientists to conform to a consensus. The published dating figures always conform to preconceived dates and never contradict those dates. So thinking about just the pressure to conform. We could go back to like Galileo, right? He was saying the Earth was round and all this stuff, and they kind of like squashed that, right? Because the consensus of the day was that the Earth was flat, right? Or whatever it was back in the day, and there's been a consensus, and they're going to push everything else down that they don't want to accept. Okay, that it's no different than what happens today within the realm of science. Okay, with whatever the topic may be, like they don't even want to see anything outside of the norm, anything outside of what's the trusted science. Okay. They don't, anything outside of that, we're not going to consider it. And if anyone does come out with it, then we're going to blackball them. We're going to blacklist them, and they're going to have, no say-so whatsoever. Okay. And we've seen that just with this subject here. In general, dates in the correct ballpark are assumed to be correct and are published, but those in disagreement with other data are seldom published, nor are discrepancies fully explained. Dr. Richard Mauger, Contributions to Geology, that was in 1977, 50 years ago. All right, so, and this is something else too. Like if you start getting into this stuff, and they're like, "Oh, well, what published articles are you getting this from?" Well, they're stopping the stuff from being published. I'm not saying they're not out there, because they are, but that's a big thing, because the Jew seeks a sign and the Greek seeks after knowledge, right? So in our society here, we want, we uplift education, and I'm not saying education's bad, but we put it on a level that, well, what does science say? I mean, even everything going on with COVID, you go back to 2020, and you'd say anything that even somewhat came against what was being pushed out by the media, and it was like, well, are you a doctor? Well, I don't have to be a doctor to know how to read and have half intelligence to see if something's right or wrong. Like, I can understand some things. I don't have to be an architect to understand some things about building something. I mean, I can read and comprehend things. Like, we're all capable of doing those things. So just this here, those in disagreement with other data are seldom published. So they're going to push out then that, well, oh, well, has it been published? Is this information, basically what they're saying, is it reliable? Well, when they're stopping it from even being published, you know, there's a problem. But if all the rejected dates were retrieved from the wastebasket and added to the published dates, the combined results would show that the dates produced are the scatter that one would expect by chance alone. Okay, it's just, all this stuff is just everywhere. It's all over the place is what they're saying. So there's really no consensus because it's everywhere, just like some of the examples we saw. They're all over the place. So how do we know how old the earth is if we go based on what science, so-called science teaches us? Ian Taylor, an engineer, said none of this is mentioned in popular magazines and textbooks, and the impression is left in the reader's mind that absolute chronology has been established by the radiocarbon method. Isn't that what we get? Just looking at what's put out there, what we hear, isn't that the consensus? Is that, oh, it's all accepted. It's billions of years old. It's millions of years old, hundreds of millions, right? That's the consensus that's put out there. But none of this other stuff is mentioned because they have an agenda they want to push. Number 5. By the way, what is that agenda? What would be the purpose in keeping this stuff? What is the ultimate agenda in this? What's that? Okay, why would it be to disprove the Bible? What's that? That's it. They don't want you to believe in God. And I'm going to be more specific. They don't want people coming to Christ. And I'm not saying maybe the individuals involved specifically. I'm talking about the principalities and powers, the spiritual warfare that we're in. I believe the Bible, okay? And I believe the devil is at work in all of this. And he uses this to keep people from coming to Christ. That's what it is. How many people have been infected with this stuff, with this bad information, with falsities that have pushed them to follow an evolutionary mindset or an atheistic mindset and reject God? How many? It's untold. We don't know how many, but it's a huge number of people. You hear of young children that grow up in a Christian home all their life being taught these things, and maybe they weren't grounded like they should have been, whatever, but they're still, this is what their parents believed in Jesus Christ, and they taught them to follow Jesus Christ, and they showed them that all the way through, and then they go to college, and college absolutely destroys their faith in the Bible, destroys their faith in God, all based on lies. All based on lies. So we have to ask ourselves, who would want to be a part of that? Who would be behind that? To me, it's an easy answer. It's the devil. Why? Because that keeps people from coming to Jesus Christ. Turn with me, if you would. Grab your Bibles. Go to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter number 11. Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 is where we're going to be. The Bible says, but without faith, it is impossible to please him, speaking about God. And here it is, get this. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So a person must first believe that he is. What? That he is, that he exists. That's where it starts. You have to believe he exists. And if that's taken away, then what chance do they have of coming to Christ? If they don't first believe that God exists, that there's a possibility of that. And that's where all this goes. That's what this leads to. It's to keep people from Christ, to keep people from salvation, from having their sins forgiven through Jesus Christ. Because if there's no God, then I don't have to, what do my sins matter? What does it matter? It doesn't, because I just answer to me. And then that leads into everything. There is no morality. There isn't. If there's no God, there's no morality. There's no right and wrong. And if you say there's a right and wrong, well, who are you to say? Who made you the authority? That's just what you think. If you tell me, oh, it's wrong to murder, says you. It's wrong to steal, says you. Who says? Society? Well, I think they're wrong. Society under the Nazis said that Jews weren't people. They weren't humans. So we're going to go with that? I mean, where does it end? See, if there's no God, there is no authority. If there's no God, there's no morality. So if there's no God, then I can do whatever I want. I don't have to listen to you. I make my own rules. And that's what it is, and I get to live how I want. Okay, so it's not mentioned in popular magazines because the impression is that, there's an absolute chronology, and we understand why. Number 5, most dating methods point to a young Earth. Look at that. Walt Brown, who has a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT, lists 22 dating methods that point to a young Earth. Andrew Snelling, a PhD in geology, lists several dating methods that point to a young Earth. So this is what I kind of wanted to get to, some of these questions here. The following questions are by Mark Cadwallader, a chemical engineer. He asked this: why do the oldest trees happen to be just a few thousand years old? So let me ask you, what do you think the age of the oldest trees could be? Based on your understanding of the Bible, and there's something, as we've been talking about this, I always bring up. So based on that, what do you think is the age of the oldest trees that they could be roughly? 2,000, I'd say more. About 4,000, right? 3,500, 4,000 years old. Why? Why do we put that date on it? The flood, right? Because the flood came. So everything started growing after the flood, right? So that's why it's going to be. But why do the oldest trees happen to be just a few thousand years old? Why is there so little helium in the atmosphere if such a quickly diffusing gas is escaping from rocks at high rates? Why are there radioactive halos preserved in granite rocks from elements with half-lives of only several minutes? Why do polystrate fossils pierce through so many different layers of supposed geologic time? Now, what's that talking about? That last one on the bottom. Why do polystrate fossils pierce through so many different layers of supposed geologic time? What is that talking about? I know. It's like, what's that? Right, the geologic time is the supposed layers of time, right? This is wherever it's at in the rock layers dates it, correct? So why are there polystrate fossils? What's it talking about? Running through those layers. Petrified trees. Why are there trees, petrified trees running through those layers that took millions of years? Each one represents millions of years, right? How's there a tree going through them? That's a pretty old tree, right? What could explain that? How are things fossilized? They're buried quickly, immediately, right? A flood. The flood explains that, how that happens. Why are carbon-14 dating measurements continually finding mere thousands of years for fossilized trees? Why is carbon-14 being found in some diamonds and coal, in which all the radioactive carbon should be long gone because they are supposed to be millions of years old? That's a huge one to me right there. Okay, why is carbon-14 being found in some diamonds and coal, in which all the radioactive carbon should be long gone because they're supposed to be millions of years old? I mean, if you look at the half-life of it, right? It should be like 100,000 years old is what they've told us it should be, right? The half-life, it should basically be dissipated by the time it's 100,000 years old, and there should be zero trace of carbon-14 in anything, right? And if it's been here for millions of years, then why can they find carbon-14 still? But they're going to reject that in order to continue to believe millions of years. Why are many gas and oil reservoirs under such high pressures so that they become gushers and flow of their own accord? I wish I had one of those gushers, by the way. And they flow of their own accord when rock porosity, permeability, and cracks are all around to relieve pressure over the supposed millions of years. How come there's still that pressure? Why is the Earth's magnetic field decaying so rapidly, extrapolating backwards to levels that would be destabilizing within approximately 10,000 years? So basically, we'd just be gone, right? If it's not here at the rate it's going. So why do we see so many comets in our solar system, since the comet tails are evidence of their volatile material boiling away as they pass by the sun? They should all have been consumed by now if the solar system is billions of years old. This is a good one right here. Think about it. Why haven't the continents eroded nearly flat? There's nobody really picking up all the dirt, the sediment that ends up in the oceans and bringing it back to the tops of the mountains and setting it back up there, right? So this is an ongoing process. So if it's been around for, billions of years, millions of years, how come every continent hasn't eroded flat? It's a good question to ask. Why haven't the oceans accumulated sediment thousands of feet deep if the Earth is really billions of years old? And that has to do with the erosion as well. So why doesn't that happen? Why hasn't that happened? David Stone, a PhD in physics, says the observations cited in the questions above are all affirmative evidence for a young Earth. Evolutionists will always come up with stories to try to explain away the simple, direct implication of these observations. It's up to you to discern between stories and evidence. So that's our responsibility. Number 6, biomaterials and ancient fossils point to a young Earth. What explains the existence of biomaterials and soft tissue and fossils that are allegedly millions of years old? Researchers have uncovered biological molecules like proteins, DNA, and pigments from fossils that are supposedly millions of years old. Laboratory studies indicate that they will only survive thousands, not millions of years. Okay, so these studies have said at the best they're going to survive thousands, no way millions of years. Mosasaur fossil at the Dinosaur Institute in Los Angeles, supposedly millions of years old, has retina pigment, dried blood residue, and preservation of skin structures from all parts of the body. In 2005, Mary Schweitzer and colleagues published a paper in Science magazine describing the presence of soft tissue in the fossilized femur of a T-Rex unearthed in Montana. In 2009, researchers reconstituted dried ink from a 150 million year old fossil squid's ink sac and used it to draw a picture of the squid. There it is. In July 2008, BBC News reported on fossil feathers that have retained their pigment colors. Professor Mike Benton asks, how do you square that with the well-known fact that the majority of organic molecules decay in thousands of years? Good, honest question. This reminds us of the joke about a man who thought he was dead. A psychologist who was trying to talk him out of this idea asked, do dead men bleed? The man replied, no. The psychologist leaned over and pricked him with a needle so that he started bleeding. What do you think now? The psychologist asked. The persistent man exclaimed, I guess dead men do bleed. So, right? When confronted with the fact that biomaterial has been found in fossils that are supposedly millions of years old, even though it is known that biomaterial doesn't survive this long, evolutionists do not give up their theory. They're saying dead men do bleed. Okay? They exclaim biomaterial does last millions of years. They're sticking with that. Here's some resources that deal with dating methods and the age of the Earth. If you want to get more into this, a summary of the research done by a team of 8 PhD scientists, the RAPE Project, there it is. Andrew Snelling, PhD in geology, the Earth's catastrophic past. Don DeYoung, a PhD in physics, thousands, not billions. Russell Humphreys, PhD in physics, Starlight and Time. Jason Lyle, PhD in astrophysics, Taking Back Astronomy. I like the subtitle, The Heavens Declare Creation and Science Confirms It. Danny Faulkner, PhD in astronomy, Universe by Design. John Harnett, PhD in physics, Dismantling the Big Bang. John D. Morris, a PhD in geological engineering, The Young Earth. Walt Brown, a PhD in mechanical engineering, In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood. There's a good discussion on dating methods in Ian Taylor's In the Minds of Men. And that's it for this one. Let's see where we're at. All right. I think I could probably get through this. So this is what we've been going through in evolution and science, the history of evolution, Darwin skeptics today, natural selection, mutations, vestigial organs, peppered moth, embryo development, ape men, the fossil record, billions of years, and now we're on homology. We're almost done. So homology, practically every biology textbook and every natural history museum uses homology as an evidence for evolution. This means that creatures share limbs and organs that look similar. An example is the leg bone, and here's examples of the turtle, the alligator, the bird, mammals. Charles Darwin. I should infer from analogy that probably all the organic beings which have ever lived on this earth have descended from some one primordial form. These homologous structures provide evidence of a common ancestor. Prentice Hall Biology 2002. I remember my science books going through school were Prentice Hall. So these homologous structures provide evidence of a common ancestor. Homology is used to demonstrate the evolution of the horse. Homology is used to demonstrate the evolution of man from apes. The famous parade of man is an argument from homology. All right. Six of those are false. Okay, 6 of those are just an artist's idea. 2 of them are true. The first one and the last one. Okay, that's it. The others in between are all false. They've never found any of that. There's no upright walking, monkeys or apes. They don't walk upright. They can for short periods, but they're not designed to do that. They lay over. They walk on their knuckles. That's how they get around. Their hips are made different than a man's. So all of this, from right there over to here, is all just made up. It's all faith. It's all imaginary. Okay, there's no evidence for it. There's nothing in the fossil record for any of that. Homology is used to demonstrate the evolution of the whale. By the way, let me get back to this. Remember when we looked at all those supposed, missing links that they found? One was like a pig tooth. The other one was just, what was the other one? It was just an ape. And then the other one was just like stuff that someone put together, right? Those are just the examples of what they're trying to find the missing links from ape to man. Okay, so none of it's true. There's no evidence of it. Homology is used to demonstrate the evolution of the whale, because this makes sense, because evolution says that we came out of the primordial, soup, the primordial ooze. If you go back with evolution, what it teaches at the very beginning is, the earth was covered with water, and the first simple cell organism was in that, and then it eventually came and crawled out of the soup, okay, and then started to develop, turned into this thing, and then it went all of a sudden, hey, let me go back to the water. Wanted to go back into the water. That's essentially what it's teaching. That's what this is showing, the evolution of a whale. Okay, some Diacodexis is what it calls it, but I don't even know, some dog-looking thing, and then it goes back, turns into like an alligator, and then, it lost its ability to walk, and now it's swimming in the water at this one right here, and then, hey, we have a whale. Like, that makes sense, doesn't it? It seems to fit, right? Okay, what 8-year-old's not going to believe that? What 8-year-old's not going to believe that? My trusted teacher who loves me, teaches me, takes care of me is telling me this. Why wouldn't they believe that? What reason would they have not to believe that? And then as they grow up all the way going into high school, they're like, well, no, I've been shown all this stuff all the way through that evolution is true, when they don't have the discerning ability when they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, even, on through high school sometimes. But you understand, when they're in those younger formative years, they don't have the discernment to recognize, hey, what's wrong with that? They don't have the critical thinking skills necessary to say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. There might be one kid in a million that has the critical thinking skills to recognize that, but what's that do for all the others, right? And so their thinking is, well, I've been taught, I've seen the evidence my whole life going through school, so of course it's true. Of course evolution is true. And that's why we've got these young high school kids and college kids and grown adults that have been taught this their whole life. And now they're saying that, yeah, of course evolution's true. You dumb Bible thumpers, what do you know? But they've all been taught lies. And they've used stuff like this to teach them it's true. So homology, the argument from homology is based entirely on evolutionary assumption. Okay, remember, that's the two worldviews we've got, right? I have a biblical worldview. I read everything, I see things through the lens of the Bible. And there's an evolutionary worldview, right? They're coming with evolutionary assumptions. They have that worldview, and that's how they're seeing things. So they're going to try and make everything fit into that. Instead, what both of us should do is look at the evidence and say, where does that lead us? Now, I've delved into this. I have enough faith in the Bible. I've seen the proof of the Bible. I've looked at archaeology proving the Bible right. I've looked at even now this stuff with evolution proving the Bible right. I've looked at prophecy proving the Bible right. Okay, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is pretty big. Okay, a man rising from the dead, that proves what he says is truth because he prophesied that was going to happen. But I've looked at all these things and I see it now. I know 100% the Bible is truth. So I'm going to make sure everything lines up with the Bible, because the Bible's proven science and archaeology and even their supposed history wrong so many times. So many times they deny things in the Bible because they say, oh, well, we've never found that. And then all of a sudden they find it in archaeology and it proves exactly what the Bible said. So that's where I'm coming from. But we have to recognize they're coming with this worldview of evolution and the assumptions. Number two, the assumption is that evolution has a mechanism that can create. Now, we looked at that. Does anybody remember what that was when we were looking at the mechanism? They say there's two that they say evolution has to create. Do we remember what those are? Anybody? Okay, mutation. Mutation and natural selection. Right? Mutation and natural selection. Right? Okay, we'll look at that more when we go farther. The founders of biological classification did not believe that homology points to evolution. Number 4, limbs in creatures are more different than similar. Number 5, at the genetic level, the structures are not formed in the same way. All right, number 1, the argument from homology is based entirely on the assumption that evolution is true. Similarity of structure is not evidence for evolution. It could as easily point to common design as common evolution, because we see common design. Hey, it works. We're going to use this design. All right. It would be reasonable for the creator to use similar structures and processes in creatures created to live in the same environment. Engineers use devices like gears, wheels, ball joints, and switches in all different kinds of machines. The wheel is used in roller skates, bicycles, carts, and cars. By the way, all of those have a bearing as well. This is not evidence of evolution. It is evidence of common design because we recognize it works. Dr. Terry Mortensen says this: roller skates, bikes, cars, trucks, buses, and trains all have wheels, but one is not the ancestor of the other. They are similar because intelligent human designers have all thought that wheels are a good way to move things on land. Pretty simple. Slapping down eyes of a varying complexity on a chart and then drawing arrows from less complex to more complex does nothing to explain how the eyes emerged. They're still eyes, right? Number 2, homology is based on the assumption that evolution can create. Here it is. So the two classic mechanisms of Darwinism are natural selection and genetic mutation. Neither of these have creative powers. Why? Because within both of those mechanisms, it can only use the information that's there. No new information is brought in. It only uses the information that's available. Okay? And that's what we see when we look at microevolution, which is real. Don't necessarily care for the term, but that's something that we can exhibit, we can look at, we can see, we can verify. Microevolution. And then there's macroevolution, which is what we're talking about here, okay, which is Darwinian evolution, which is one kind changing to another kind. Okay, so like that land-dwelling animal turning into a whale. Okay, that's macroevolution. That has never been exhibited. That's never been seen. There's zero evidence for it. Okay, microevolution, we see it all the time. And again, I keep bringing this up, but that's what Darwin saw when he went on his worldwide tour, and he looked at the finches on the Galapagos Islands, and he saw that, hey, these are all different in different parts of the island. that's true. There's microevolution. There was different changes, different beak sizes. Why? Because it had to do with their location. But guess what? All of that information was there. There was no new information brought in. It was already information that was contained within that bird. And it was still a bird. It never changed to anything else. Just the information adapted. So this is what they say helps with this is natural selection, genetic mutation, but they don't have the power to bring in information. Natural selection might be able to select a certain beak size on a finch, but it cannot create a beak or a finch. Genetic mutations are overwhelmingly harmful and do not add the information to the DNA that would be required to create complex new structures. If you remember when we looked at the fruit flies, it just deforms them. It doesn't help them in any way. Usually ends up killing them. But mutations aren't a good thing. They're a bad thing. They don't bring in anything good. Since Darwinists won't allow, and by the way, let me back up, even with what the mutations bring in, it's already information that's already there. Remember we saw the pictures of the cows with like a fifth leg coming out of like their shoulder or something? That information's already there. It's just bad. It doesn't help it. If anything, it's going to get in the way. So it's not good. Okay, so since Darwinists don't allow or won't allow a divine foot in the door, they are back at square one with no answer to the million-dollar question, what is the power that fashioned such an amazing world of living things? Number 3, the founders of the biological classification system did not believe that homology points to evolution. Carl Linnaeus, who formulated the system for classifying plants and animals that is still used today, was a creationist. Georges Cuvier, one of the founders of comparative anatomy, was a creationist. Stuart Burgess in Hallmarks of Design says this, it is ironic that many modern scientists quote classification trees, comparative anatomy, and paleontology as evidence for evolution when the founding scientists of these subjects were strong supporters of biblical creation. Number 4, limbs and creatures are actually more different than similar. A man is dramatically different from an ape. Absolutely. Completely different. A bat's wing is dramatically different from a human arm. I mean, completely different purposes, just much different. Number 5, at the genetic level, the structures are not formed in the same way. This biology textbook wrongly claims that homologous structures can be traced to the genetic level. The limbs derive from the same structures in the embryo. This is not true. Consider the formation of human and frog digits. In humans, ridges form first, then cell death divides the ridge into 5 regions that then develop into fingers and toes. In frogs, buds form, then digits grow outward from the buds. It's different. It is not the same. Homology offers zero evidence for the doctrine of the evolution of life. Evolution does not qualify as a scientific theory or even a hypothesis. It is a mythical story. That's why I say all the time it's faith. It's a faith. It's a religion. That's how it should be counted at, as a religion, because that's what it is. All right.